Before we start, please make sure to like this video and hit this subscribe button, so you never miss a story like this. And also comments where you are watching from, how many sons and daughters you have. Thanks. My name is Evelyn Hartmann, and I am 71 years old. If you think life gets easier with age, let me tell you my story, because what happened to me will make you question what family really means. Backhand index pointing. Right before I continue, ask yourself this: if the people you sacrificed everything for suddenly turned their back on you, would you still keep helping them? Stick with me until the end, because my answer shocked even me. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I had just picked up the phone to call my son, Adrian, to ask when his wedding would be. I had my calendar ready, the pale lavender dress I bought hanging in my closet, and shoes polished, waiting for the big day. But before Adrian could even say a word, his fiancée Clara looked me straight in the eye with a chilling smile and said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." Those words cut deeper than a knife. Special people. I, who had paid their rent for 3 years. I, who had bought every stick of furniture in their home. I, who had filled their fridge when they had nothing to eat. I was not a special person. I stood frozen in my own living room, clutching the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. My son Adrian avoided my eyes, while Clara made herself comfortable on the sofa I had bought for them with my pension savings. In my closet, the $200 lavender dress I had chosen for her wedding hung useless, along with the matching shoes, never to be worn. I had spent weeks planning the perfect outfit, imagining myself in the wedding photos that would never include me. For months, I had been saving $1,000 as their wedding gift. I had called my sister, Marianne, in Chicago to share the joyful news. I had scrubbed my house from top to bottom, preparing to host them after the ceremony. All of it collapsed with those 4 poisoned words: only special people. Adrian finally spoke, his voice oddly rehearsed. "Mom, it was an intimate thing. Just us and the witnesses." But I knew the truth. Because when I opened my phone later that night, I saw the photos on social media. Clara's parents stood proudly next to the bride and groom. Her siblings toasted with champagne. She wore a wedding dress I had unknowingly helped finance with the $800 I gave her for personal expenses. I saw everything I wasn't supposed to see. And for the first time I realized I had been erased. 1 week later, just 7 days after that humiliation, Clara called me again. But this time, her voice wasn't triumphant. It was desperate. "Evelyn, the rent is overdue. The landlord says if we don't pay this week, we'll be kicked out. You forgot to make the transfer." Her voice trembled as though the world was collapsing. I stayed silent. My mind replayed the countless mornings I had rushed to the bank to transfer money for their rent. The dinners I had skipped to ensure they had groceries. The $33,000 I had drained from my savings over the past 3 years to keep them afloat. And now, after excluding me from their wedding, they had the audacity to call me, expecting help as if nothing had changed. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "Clara, didn't I tell you? I only help special people." The silence on the other end was deafening. For the first time in years, it wasn't me trembling. It was her. That night, I sat on my bed and cried. Not out of sadness, but out of anger. Years of humiliation and neglect flooded through me. I wasn't crying for them, I was crying for the fool I had been. But when I woke up the next morning, something inside me had shifted. I looked in the mirror and saw the same tired wrinkles, the same eyes weighed down by sacrifice. But behind them, there was something new. Determination. That was the day I decided I would stop begging for love. I would stop financing a life where I was not welcome. And I would take back control of everything they had stolen from me, starting with my money. What I didn't know was that this decision would trigger a battle I never imagined, a war not for their rent, not for their comfort, but for my very freedom. Because Adrian and Clara weren't going to let go of their golden goose so easily. They had a plan, a dangerous one. The morning after Clara's desperate phone call, I brewed myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the dining table. But instead of setting out bills for their rent, or jotting reminders for their needs, I laid out my bank statements. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating their survival. I was calculating the price of my own foolishness. Rent, $500 every month for 36 months. $18,000 gone. Groceries, $200 a month for 3 years. $7,200 gone. Birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, at least $3,000. Clara's emergencies, doctor visits, prescriptions, urgent expenses, $800. The car loan Adrian promised to repay but never did, $2,500. Their broken air conditioner I paid to fix, $600. Furniture for their apartment, $1,200. When I totaled it, the number burned into my eyes. $33,400. $33,400. Not an investment. Not a loan. Just gone. It was the money my late husband, Walter, and I had saved for our retirement. The trips we dreamed of taking. The little cushion to make my final years comfortable. And I had handed it away, piece by piece, lie by lie, because I believed it would buy me love, gratitude, or at least a place in my son's life. Instead, it bought me invisibility. The phone rang. Adrian's name glowed on the screen. Once upon a time, that name would have made my heart skip. Now it only made me sigh. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then silence. 10 minutes later, Clara's name appeared. I let that ring too. A message followed. Mom, please answer. We need to talk. Delete. For the first time, I wasn't their safety net. For the first time, I chose myself. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I put on my coat and walked to the park. It had been months since I had walked without a purpose, without an errand to serve him. I passed the swings where Adrian, as a little boy, used to laugh until his belly hurt. I remembered the child who hugged me tight after nightmares, whispering, "You're the best mom in the world." When had he grown into this man who treated me like an ATM with wrinkles? When had I started confusing money with love? I didn't have the answers. But I knew one thing, my story was about to change. The next morning, I walked into the bank. The branch manager, Mr. Keller, looked up and smiled. He had processed every transfer to Adrian and Clara for years, watching my account shrink with clockwork precision. "Mrs. Hartman," he greeted warmly. "Another transfer today?" "No," I said firmly. "I need to cancel all of them. Effective immediately." His smile faded. "All of them? Are you sure? After all these years?" "I'm sure," I cut him off. "And I want information on how to protect my accounts. No one else should have access to my money." For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. As Mr. Keller processed the paperwork, my phone buzzed nonstop. Adrian. Clara. Adrian again. Almost as if they could feel the cash flow being cut off. I turned. When I slammed the door behind them, the silence that followed felt less like solitude and more like a landing, one that would either break me or set me free. I sat at my kitchen table with the leftover crumbs of a life I'd been feeding to other people. The man in the gray suit, Mr. Fisher, had left with a smile that promised trouble. Adrian and Clara had walked out with the wounded pride of people who believed they owned my life. My hands were still shaking when I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Evelyn Hartman," the voice answered, warm and unmistakable. "Mr. Lang, it's Evelyn. I need your help." He had been my husband Walter's lawyer. He had handled our will, the house, the small inheritance Walter left us. I had seen him as a steady lighthouse when the waters got rough. Today, I needed that lighthouse to cut through smoke and mirrors. Within hours I was sitting across from him in a walnut-paneled office that smelled of old books and honest work. I handed him copies of bank statements, digital transfer proofs, photos of the social media posts from their secret wedding. I told him, without pause, everything I had been ashamed to admit for years: the money, the favors, the nights I stayed up counting pennies so they wouldn't go without. Mr. Lang listened without interruption. When I finished, he rubbed his chin and said, "Evelyn, what they attempted at your house today is textbook elder financial abuse. They invoked the very language abusers use: concern, worry, we need to protect you. It's a legal path to strip you of control." "Can they do it?" I asked. "Declare me incompetent? Take my life away with a stamp?" "They can file a petition," he replied. "But it must be backed with evidence, medical evaluations, affidavits, and, importantly, your financial records showing irregularities you did not authorize. Which is the opposite of your case: you authorized everything." Relief washed through me. Not because I suddenly felt safe, but because the path to fight back was clear. Paper was their weapon, and paper could also be my armor. We made a list. Document everything. Gather witnesses. Request the records of any attempts to access my accounts. Change locks. Install cameras. Open a fresh account at a different bank where no one could even guess the name on the sign-up form. Update the will. And, delicate but vital, prepare for the possibility they would indeed take legal steps to seize control. Mr. Lang leaned forward. "We'll move fast. I'll draft a cease and desist, and we'll file declarations showing your competence and history of sound decisions. Do you have a primary care physician who can attest to your mental acuity?" "Yes," I said. "Dr. Morales. I see her every 6 months." "Good. I'll call her. Also, don't let them back inside your house uninvited. Change the locks today." I left his office with a folder thick with plans and a very grown-up fury. It surprised me how my anger had become a tool. Instead of hiding it, I used it. The phone off. "Mrs. Hartman," Mr. Keller said softly, "I don't mean to intrude, but I've seen you be incredibly generous. Please tell me, you're not being pressured into this?" His concern struck me harder than I expected. This man, who barely knew me beyond account numbers and signatures, was showing more genuine care than my own son had in years. I looked him straight in the eye. "No, Mr. Keller. For the first time, I'm not being pressured at all. I'm finally free." When I walked out of that bank, I felt taller, stronger, almost as if I had left 33,400 pounds of weight behind. But I didn't know, freedom would come with a price. That evening, as I returned home, I noticed 3 cars parked in front of my house. Adrian's. Clara's. And a third I didn't recognize. Through the window, I saw movement inside. Shadows. Figures. My blood ran cold. They had keys. I had trusted them with keys. I gripped the doorknob, my pulse racing. I knew, whatever waited inside would change everything. I pushed open the door. And froze. Adrian sat slumped on my sofa, his head in his hands. Clara paced like a caged lioness. At my dining table sat a man in a gray suit, rifling through my personal documents. My documents. My life. "What is happening here?" I demanded, louder than I intended. All 3 turned, startled. Clara spoke first, her voice dripping urgency. "Evelyn, thank God you're here. This is Mr. Fisher, from a law firm. We needed to talk about your situation." "My situation?" I repeated coldly. Adrian lifted his head, his eyes desperate. "Mom, the bank told us you canceled everything. Mr. Fisher is here to help. We're worried about you." Mr. Fisher stood, extending a hand I refused to shake. "Mrs. Hartman, I'm a family law attorney. Your children are concerned about your mental well-being. They asked me to assess the situation." I stared at the stranger in my house, at the stolen papers on my table, and a chill spread through me. This wasn't about worry. This wasn't about love. It was about control. And in that moment, I understood the terrifying truth. They weren't just trying to guilt me into helping again. They were trying to take everything.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम पप्पू, क्या हाल है आपका? हाँ जी पप्पू, शुक्र अल्लाह का, उनका अम्मी का ऑपरेशन बखैर वाफियत हो गया है। ठीक ठाक। उनका सर्जरी बहुत बड़ी नहीं करनी पड़ी, लेप्रोस्कोपी हुई है, लेकिन इनका असल में पित्ता अंदर फट गया हुआ था, तो वो ज़्यादा डेंजरस था। तो सुबह से डॉक्टर ने बहुत डराया हुआ था कि कुछ भी हो सकता है। तो अल्लाह का शुक्र है, अम्मी है भी हिम्मत वाली। तो अभी आईसीयू में शिफ्ट हैं, कर दिया उन्होंने, हम देखा है। अभी होश नहीं आया, लेकिन अल्लाह का शुक्र, डॉक्टर कह रहा है कि ठीक है।
When I slammed the door behind them, the silence that followed felt less like solitude and more like a landing, one that would either break me or set me free. I sat at my kitchen table with the leftover crumbs of a life I'd been feeding to other people. The man in the gray suit, Mr. Fisher, had left with a smile that promised trouble. Adrian and Clara had walked out with the wounded pride of people who believed they owned my life. My hands were still shaking when I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Evelyn Hartman, the voice answered, warm and unmistakable. Mr. Lang, it's Evelyn. I need your help. He had been my husband Walter's lawyer. He had handled our will, the house, the small inheritance Walter left us. I had seen him as a steady lighthouse when the waters got rough. Today, I needed that lighthouse to cut through smoke and mirrors. Within hours I was sitting across from him in a walnut-paneled office that smelled of old books and honest work. I handed him copies of bank statements, digital transfer proofs, photos of the social media posts from their secret wedding. I told him, without pause, everything I had been ashamed to admit for years: the money, the favors, the nights I stayed up counting pennies so they wouldn't go without. Mr. Lang listened without interruption. When I finished, he rubbed his chin and said, Evelyn, what they attempted at your house today is textbook elder financial abuse. They invoked the very language abusers use: concern, worry, we need to protect you. It's a legal path to strip you of control. Can they do it? I asked. Declare me incompetent? Take my life away with a stamp? They can file a petition, he replied. But it must be backed with evidence, medical evaluations, affidavits, and, importantly, your financial record showing irregularities you did not authorize. Which is the opposite of your case, you authorized everything. Relief washed through me. Not because I suddenly felt safe, but because the path to fight back was clear. Paper was their weapon, and paper could also be my armor. We made a list. Document everything. Gather witnesses. Request the records of any attempts to access my accounts. Change locks. Install cameras. Open a fresh account at a different bank where no one could even guess the name on the sign-up form. Update the will. And, delicate but vital, prepare for the possibility they would indeed take legal steps to seize control. Mr. Lang leaned forward. We'll move fast. I'll draft a cease and desist, and we'll file declarations showing your competence and history of sound decisions. Do you have a primary care physician who can attest to your mental acuity? Yes, I said. Dr. Morales. I see her every 6 months. Good. I'll call her. Also, don't let them back inside your house uninvited. Change the locks today. I left his office with a folder thick with plans and a very grown-up fury. It surprised me how my anger had become a tool. Instead of hiding it, I used it, like a compass. The locksmith changed the locks by noon. The technician who installed the security system arrived in the late afternoon and placed small, discreet cameras where they would catch any unwanted hands near my bedroom door or at the back entrance. Watching him snap the last mount into place felt almost ceremonial. For the first time in years, I had boundaries that were enforced by metal and code, not by hope. That evening, Mr. Lang called to say he had spoken with Dr. Morales. She agreed to perform a cognitive evaluation and issue a written declaration confirming my mental competence. He also had reached out to the bank and placed a hold on any attempts to add new signatories or change access to my accounts without notarized forms and a 2-week waiting period. It should have been enough. But people who have been relying on someone else's goodwill seldom accept the sudden withdrawal of it gracefully. They plan. They maneuver. And sometimes they collude with professionals willing to cross lines for a fee. 3 days after I cancelled the transfers, an envelope arrived with my name in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a document, a notarized durable power of attorney allegedly signed by me 2 months earlier. It named Adrian as my agent, granting him broad authority to manage my finances. The signature looked like mine. The notary seal was intact. The paper smelled of official ink. My first breath left me in a small, involuntary gasp. Fraud often wears the suit of legitimacy. I called Mr. Lang. He came over immediately. We spread the document across my kitchen table like an accusation. He ran his fingers along the signature and then set the paper down. "We'll subpoena the notary," he said. "We'll check the notary's journal and cross-reference their schedule. If this was forged, it will show up, places signed at times you were elsewhere, inconsistencies in the stamp. Forgery leaves microscopic fingerprints." I wanted to believe him. But as the sun went down and the house grew long with shadows, doubt whispered like a draft beneath a door. That same night, there was a knock at my front door. I knew most knocks at that hour: food deliveries, neighborhood associations, the neighbor's dog walker. But when I peered through the peephole, I saw a woman I'd never met, a tall woman with a badge clipped to her jacket, an official tone even in the way she breathed. "Mrs. Hartman? I'm Officer Morales with the county. We received a call expressing concern about your well-being. May we come in and check on you?" My heart thudded, but my voice was steady. "No, thank you. I'm fine." She hesitated, then showed a paper. A form, stamped by a local office, noting a welfare check requested by my son. It was a procedural step, the sort of thing well-meaning people do when they think they're protecting someone. But in this case it smelled of manipulation. I invited her to sit at the porch and talk instead of letting her step inside. We spoke for 20 minutes about my life, my routines, and my ability to handle my affairs. She left with a promise to file no further action, at least for now. After she left, I sat on the front steps and realized Clara and Adrian were already learning a new set of weapons: process, paperwork, plausibility. When you have been generous for too long, the people you help start to believe generosity is a right. And when you take that right away, they become dangerous. Mr. Lang and I worked through the night. He filed petitions to challenge the authenticity of the power of attorney. He prepared a packet proving my ongoing decision-making, my cancelled automatic transfers, my statements explaining the reasons, copies of the transfers over the past 3 years that showed no irregularities on my part. At 2:30 a.m., exhausted but unbowed, I sat at my table and read every line of the new will Mr. Lang had drafted, the one that finally reflected my wishes. For the first time in decades, the language was about my life: trips I would take, the savings I would keep, the friends I would visit. The old fear that had kept me small, of losing my son, of losing their approval, was dimming. But the night was not done with me. At 8 o'clock the next morning, before the bakery delivered my usual cinnamon roll, there was a sharp, formal knock on my door. A process server. In his hand, a summons, in the matter of the conservatorship of Evelyn Hartman. They had filed. Not a quiet mediation, but a court proceeding to declare me incapable and appoint a conservator to manage my affairs. And the petitioner? Adrian. The papers were stamped for an emergency hearing that very week. My breath shortened. My hands, the ones that had written checks, signed love notes, and folded my son's childhood letters, felt small and foreign. They had taken my wedding-free mourning, my bank transfers, my trust, and now they wanted a judge to hand them the rest. I folded the papers and placed them back in the folder Mr. Lang had given me. I felt less afraid than fierce. "Bring it on," I whispered, not to the papers, but to the people who thought they could write me out of my own life. Because if this was going to a courtroom, I had allies, witnesses, and a quiet army of receipts. And I had something no document could ever forge: the memory of a son who once promised he would always be my little boy. The war was about to move from the kitchen table to the judge's bench. And in a few days, everything, my future, my freedom, my dignity, would be argued in front of strangers. I stood, walked to the window, and watched the street where Adrian's car had been parked. A shadow crossed my lawn, no, two shadows. Figures moving fast. My heart thudded again, this time with an odd, new rhythm. Not fear. Resolve. Outside, the world was waking. Inside, my life had become a battlefield. The judge's gavel was coming. And I would be ready. The courthouse smelled like old wood and disinfectant, a blend that carried the weight of every broken promise and desperate plea ever spoken inside its walls. I clutched the folder Mr. Lang had prepared, its edges digging into my palms. This was no longer about dinners, checks, or the quiet betrayal of family. This was a war fought in fluorescent light, judged by strangers in black robes. "Stay calm, Evelyn," Mr. Lang whispered as we walked past rows of pew-like benches. "The truth is on our side. But remember, this is as much theater as it is law." Adrian was already seated at the petitioner's table. Clara sat beside him, her hair perfectly coiled, her hands folded in her lap like a portrait of composed devotion. On Adrian's other side, Mr. Fisher, the man in the gray suit, adjusted his tie with smug precision. He had become more than a consultant. He was their weapon. When Adrian saw me enter, his eyes flickered with something between guilt and defiance. He looked away quickly, fixing his gaze on the judge's bench. Judge Whittaker entered, stern and deliberate, the kind of man whose silence carried the weight of entire conversations. He read through the paperwork, his eyes scanning the allegations: cognitive decline, financial mismanagement, vulnerability to undue influence. Each word cut into me, like accusations painted in ink. The bailiff called for opening statements. Adrian stood. His voice, once the sound of my little boy asking for bedtime stories, now carried the rehearsed cadence of a man coached by professionals. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about protection. My mother, Evelyn Hartmann, is 70 years old. We have reason to believe she has been exploited, her finances drained, her judgment clouded. We seek conservatorship not out of greed but out of love. To ensure her well-being, her safety, and her dignity." His words dripped with sincerity, crafted like a script meant for sympathy. Clara dabbed her eye with a tissue for effect. Mr. Fisher nodded, hands folded as though Adrian's speech was gospel. Mr. Lang rose slowly. "Your Honor, what my client faces is not protection, but predation. Mrs. Hartmann is of sound mind, as her physician will testify. Every financial decision she has made was her choice, including her generosity toward her son and his wife. What she seeks now is freedom, from manipulation, from entitlement, from the slow erasure of her independence." The judge nodded, his expression unreadable. "Proceed." Witnesses were called. Clara testified first. She spoke about my forgetfulness, the time I misplaced my keys, the morning I left the stove on. Small incidents, each stretched into a narrative of decline. She painted me as a woman unraveling, thread by thread. Then Adrian took the stand. He spoke of sacrifices, of watching me struggle, of the fear that I might fall prey to scams or strangers. His voice cracked at the right places, his shoulders slumped in practiced sorrow. Finally, Mr. Fisher testified. He introduced himself as a financial advisor concerned with patterns of irregular spending. He held up charts, color-coded bars meant to suggest recklessness. He called my bank transfers red flags. He described me as high risk. And the judge listened, his brow furrowed. By the time they finished, the room felt weighted against me. Then it was my turn. Mr. Lang guided me to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and met the judge's eyes. "Mrs. Hartmann," Mr. Lang said gently, "do you manage your own finances?" "Yes," I replied. My voice was steady. "I have for decades. Every bill, every transfer, every receipt." He placed exhibits before me, my bank statements, carefully highlighted. "Can you explain these regular transfers to your son and his wife?" "Yes." they asked for help. I gave it. Not once, not because I was confused, but because I chose to. It was my money, my decision. And 3 weeks ago, I chose to stop. That was also my decision. And your memory? Your mental state? I lifted my chin. I see my doctor every 6 months. She will testify that my cognitive health is intact. I garden. I read. I write. I live independently. Forgetting keys or leaving a stove burner on is not incompetence. It is humanity. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Then Mr. Lang dropped the final piece, Dr. Morales, my physician, who testified with clinical certainty that I was of sound mind. She presented test results, cognitive evaluations, her professional judgment. Mrs. Hartmann is competent, capable, and self-sufficient, she declared. The tide shifted. I could feel it in the silence that followed. But Mr. Fisher wasn't finished. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. Your Honor, he interjected, if Mrs. Hartmann is competent, then how do you explain this? He held up the forged power of attorney. The document gleamed under the fluorescent lights like a dagger. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My stomach dropped. That signature, he continued, grants Adrian authority. It suggests premeditation, planning. Mrs. Hartmann may not even recall signing it. Which, I argue, demonstrates her impaired judgment. All eyes turned to me. My breath caught, but Mr. Lang was already on his feet. Objection. This document is under active investigation. We contend it is fraudulent. The notary records will prove Mrs. Hartmann never signed it. Introducing it as fact is misleading. The judge's gavel struck once. Sustained. The document will be reviewed, but not considered until verified. The relief was small but enough to steady me. As the proceedings drew toward recess, Judge Whitaker leaned forward. This case is troubling. I see a mother's generosity mistaken for weakness, a son's concern tangled with self-interest, and an advisor whose role may warrant scrutiny. I will review all documents, including the contested power of attorney. For now, Mrs. Hartmann retains her independence. We reconvene in 2 weeks. The gavel fell. Court adjourned. The room exhaled all at once. Clara stormed out, her tissue crumpled. Adrian followed, his shoulders tight. Mr. Fisher lingered just long enough to smirk at me before disappearing through the side door. I stood, legs trembling but unbroken. Mr. Lang placed a hand on my shoulder. We bought time, he said. But they'll come harder now. They always do when they start to lose. As we stepped out into the cool afternoon air, a chill ran through me. The courthouse walls had given me protection for today, but outside those walls, on the sidewalks, in the shadows, in the quiet corners of my own home, the war was still raging. And deep down, I knew, the forged document was only the first blade. Somewhere, Adrian and Clara had a second, sharper one waiting. Today, for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into a courtroom as a mother. I was walking in as a woman defending her freedom. The air inside the courthouse was thick, buzzing with whispers and the low shuffle of papers. My heels clicked against the polished floor, steady and strong, even though inside me a storm was raging. At the far end of the room, I saw them. Caleb, my only son, sat stiffly in a dark suit, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine. Next to him was his wife, Mara, whispering rapidly into his ear, her perfectly manicured hand gripping his arm like a leash. On the other side, their lawyer, a tall man with slicked-back hair, stacked folders in front of him as if he had already won. They looked so confident. So sure of themselves. But they didn't know what I carried in my own folder. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." The judge entered, a stern-faced woman with silver hair pulled into a bun. She looked over the courtroom with sharp eyes before sitting. Case of Caleb and Mara Richter versus Evelyn Richter, the clerk announced. My knees should have trembled. My hands should have shaken. But they didn't. Because I knew the truth was on my side. The attack. Their lawyer spoke first. His voice was oily, persuasive, the kind that tried to charm and cut at the same time. Your Honor, we are deeply concerned for Mrs. Richter's well-being. She has shown troubling signs of mental decline, forgetfulness, erratic financial behavior, isolation from her family. My clients, her only close relatives, simply want to protect her from her own confusion. They are asking for temporary guardianship to help manage her finances responsibly. I felt Mara's eyes burning into me. She leaned close to Caleb and whispered something that made him smirk. The lawyer continued, "This is not about money. This is about love. About ensuring Mrs. Richter spends her final years cared for, not lost in confusion." Every word was poison wrapped in velvet. And for a flicker of a moment, I saw doubt ripple through the judge's eyes. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Richter, you may respond." I rose slowly, my folder in my hands. My voice was calm, but it carried. "Your Honor, I may be 71, but I am not confused. The only confusion here is why my own son and his wife believe they can strip me of the very independence I've earned over a lifetime." I opened the folder and pulled out the first stack of papers. These are bank records. For 3 years, I paid their rent, $500 a month, totaling $18,000. I bought their furniture. I filled their refrigerator. I paid medical bills, car loans, even their honeymoon. I set the records on the judge's desk with a sharp thud. Altogether, Your Honor, I spent $33,400 supporting 2 adults who were perfectly capable of supporting themselves. Money from my late husband's inheritance. Money from my pension. Money meant for my retirement. The courtroom fell into silence, except for the faint scratching of the judge's pen. Caleb's face went pale. Mara gripped his hand tighter, her nails digging into his skin. But I wasn't finished. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low but fierce, "these same people who now claim I am confused excluded me from their wedding. A wedding I helped pay for. I wasn't invited. I wasn't considered a special person. But when the rent was due, when the bills arrived, suddenly I was special again." I lifted my gaze and looked directly at Mara. Her face flushed, her lips twitching. I turned back to the judge. "And last week, they broke into my home with their lawyer, rifled through my private documents, planning to have me declared incompetent so they could seize control of my finances." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the clerk looked up. I pulled out the final piece of paper, a signed affidavit from Mr. Weber, my attorney. "This statement confirms that what they attempted is classified as elder financial abuse. A federal crime." The silence was no longer heavy. It was suffocating. The judge leaned back, her sharp eyes cutting through every lie in the room. "Mr. Richter." "Mrs. Richter," she said slowly, "this court does not find Evelyn Richter incompetent. On the contrary, she has presented herself with clarity, intelligence, and substantial evidence of manipulation. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am referring this case for review under elder abuse statutes." Mara shot to her feet. "This is outrageous." "She's twisting." "Sit down, Mrs. Richter," the judge's voice cracked like a whip. Caleb's face collapsed into his hands. For the first time I didn't see my little boy. I saw a grown man drowning in his own greed. When the session ended, Mara stormed out of the courtroom, heels clattering like gunshots. Caleb lingered a moment, his eyes red, his lips trembling as if he wanted to speak. But I didn't move. I didn't reach out. I simply gathered my papers, placed them back in my folder, and walked past him as if he were a stranger. Because in many ways, he was. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The same table where I had once counted pennies to send to Caleb. The same table where I had once wept, feeling invisible. Now, it was different. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was beautiful. It was mine. I had lost a son to greed. But I had gained something even more precious. My freedom. My dignity. my self-respect. And for the first time in years, I felt alive.